What's up, everybody, and welcome back to another video here on Review and Preview Sports. I'm Kyle Russo, and what I'm here to talk about today is Baker Mayfield. Because everybody's wondering, after the recent acquisition of Deshaun Watson, where will Baker Mayfield land? Well, first off, before I get into where Baker Mayfield will land, we're going to get into a couple things here first. Obviously, just a couple days ago, the Cleveland Browns make a massive trade to the Houston Texans, in which, in return, the Cleveland Browns received Deshaun Watson and a 2024 sixth-round pick for Deshaun Watson to be their new franchise quarterback as soon as he signs on with the Browns. He gets a 5-year deal, $230 million, I believe, all guaranteed money, making him the highest paid player in the NFL and its entirety in its history of the sport in terms of guaranteed money, which is absolutely crazy. And in return, the Houston Texans received 3 first-round picks, one in 2022, one in 2023, one in 2024. They received 1 third-round pick in 2023, 2 fourth-round picks in 2022 and 2024. Just a massive trade for a quarterback. Just a massive trade in general for a quarterback that hasn't played in a year. But the Cleveland Browns get their new franchise quarterback. Now, we knew rumors were coming out about a day or two before the Cleveland Browns actually acquired a Deshaun Watson that he had narrowed it down to a couple teams, the Cleveland Browns being one of them, obviously, the Atlanta Falcons, the Carolina Panthers being others. But as soon as these rumors came out, Baker Mayfield on March 15 took to Instagram and he wrote a message to the city of Cleveland. And what he said in his message, I'm going to read it off. The past 4 years, this is Baker Mayfield, the past 4 years have been nothing short of truly life-changing since I heard my name called in the draft to go to Cleveland. This is not a message with hidden meaning. This is strictly to thank the city of Cleveland for embracing my family and me. We have made many memories and shared growing in this process through all the ups and downs. I have no clue what happens next, which is the meaning behind the silence I have had during the duration of this process. I can only control what I can, which is trusting in God's plan throughout this process. I have given this franchise everything I have. That is something I've always done at every stage and at every level. And that will not change wherever I take my next step, wherever I take my next snap. Whatever happens, I just want to say thank you to the fans who truly embraced who I am and the mentality that aligns so well with this city's hardworking people. Cleveland will always be a part of Emily and my story, and we will always be thankful for the impact it has had and will have in our lives. Sincerely, Baker Megan Mayfield. Excuse me, Baker Reagan Mayfield. Butchered that last part, but that's Baker Mayfield's goodbye before this trade even takes place. I believe it happened a day or two later, in which the Cleveland Browns officially acquired a Deshaun Watson. Now, this is where we start getting into, well, what does this mean for Baker Mayfield? The Cleveland Browns, they did pick up his 5th-year option, which is an $18.8 million cap hit. So, obviously, they have 2 quarterbacks on their roster, and seemingly enough, Deshaun Watson is going to be their starter without a doubt. Now, Baker Mayfield wants out, obviously. In fact, he did request a trade from the Cleveland Browns, I believe, before this even became official, the Deshaun Watson trade. Now, a couple teams were in the mix, and a couple teams I wanted to go over, the Carolina Panthers being one of them originally, the Indianapolis Colts being one of them originally, and the Seattle Seahawks being a team originally as well that was in on the Baker Mayfield potential acquisition. Now, first with the Carolina Panthers. The Carolina Panthers have had their own miniature carousel of quarterbacks in the last couple years, right? They tried out a Sam Darnold acquisition in which they acquired him just a season ago. And that in its first year with Sam Darnold seemingly did not work out, to be quite blunt. In fact, it was so bad that the Carolina Panthers had re-signed a Cam Newton, who was in a sense, their longest tenured quarterback in a sense, or a quarterback that had tremendous success with the organization. Former first overall pick out of Auburn by the Carolina Panthers back in 2011, re-signs with them after becoming a free agent, being released by the New England Patriots after the surgence of Mac Jones in training camp. The Patriots released him. Cam Newton signs on with the Panthers, starts the remaining games of the season, and he does not win a single game. Now, granted, with the quarterback roster in which they have right now, It's Sam Darnold. Cam Newton's still a free agent. I believe PJ Walker is still on that list of quarterbacks in Carolina. But Sam Darnold is not the franchise quarterback. That's why they are after a guy in Deshaun Watson, or were after a guy in Deshaun Watson, and are maybe even targeting some of the quarterback talent in this year's draft. They've been linked to a name like Malik Willis. They've been linked to a name like Kenny Pickett potentially in this year's draft, and we'll see what happens. But the Carolina Panthers came out with a statement saying that they're not interested in acquiring a Baker Mayfield, which makes sense because Baker Mayfield, like I brought up earlier, has an $18.8 million cap hit no matter what team trades for him. And they already have a fifth-year option quarterback in Sam Darnold, which already has an $18.8 million cap hit as well, which I believe. So it wouldn't make sense to have two of those guys on the roster to compete who are necessarily at the same playing field in terms of success in the NFL, per se. But they are no longer interested. The Indianapolis Colts were rumored to be the favorites as soon as Deshaun Watson was acquired by the Cleveland Browns. But now, over the last couple of days of free agency and all these trades going about in the NFL, they have acquired their franchise quarterback in a Matt Ryan, in which it just happened, I believe, yesterday or the day before that, in which the Falcons trade Matt Ryan to the Indianapolis Colts for a third-round pick in this year's draft. So they're out. So what does that leave them left with? What is the market for Baker Mayfield? Seattle Seahawks. That's been the team more often than not being talked about in terms of Baker Mayfield potentially being in the discussion. Now, Baker Mayfield, career-wise, is a 29-30 record as a starting quarterback in the NFL. He's a 92-56 touchdown to interception ratio, which isn't that bad. It's almost a 2-to-1 ratio, which isn't that bad for a quarterback in today's day and age. And he has a career 61.6% completion percentage in the NFL, which also isn't that bad, I would say. And people knock Baker Mayfield a lot because I've been on the bandwagon of supporting a Baker Mayfield. I've liked him since his days as an Oklahoma Sooner. I thought he would transition very nicely to the NFL. And when they started to give him pieces, they, meaning the Cleveland Browns, you saw some success. Now, did he have the most success in the world with the talent in which he was given, with one of the best pass blocking offensive lines in all of football, with the likes of Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt being a tandem of probably the best tandem of running backs in the entire NFL? When you have guys like David Njoku and Austin Hooper and Odell Beckham Jr. and Jarvis Landry and Donovan Peoples-Jones, now you're starting to say to yourself, well, was he surrounded with all the right weapons and he just didn't succeed? Or was he given enough? And I'd say based off of that rap sheet, he was given a lot to have success with. And people have said, and I would agree with the fact that he underachieved with what he had. And now in his first couple years, he was given the raw end of the stick. But the last couple years, having Kevin Stefanski as the head coach, I think that they underachieved. Now, they did make the playoffs in his third season, in which they had an 11-5 record back in 2020. And they were just a couple plays away in the playoffs against the Kansas City Chiefs in Kansas City, Arrowhead Stadium, which is one of the hardest places in football to play and win, from making it to the AFC Championship game. And obviously, a lot went wrong in that game for the Kansas City Chiefs to make it as close as it was for the Cleveland Browns, even though they weren't able to successfully beat the Kansas City Chiefs. Obviously, Patrick Mahomes, if we all remember, went down in that game in the third quarter, and the Browns had a chance to come back, but weren't able to do so, obviously. But with the exception of that season, the Browns have not been very successful. This season alone, Baker Mayfield finished off with a 6-8 record, which obviously is not very good as a starting quarterback, especially a fourth-year quarterback. But I will say this in his defense before I get into the Seattle Seahawks as this last remaining team that potentially can pick up a Baker Mayfield. In this season alone, because Baker Mayfield historically has not really been an injury-prone type player. This has really been his first season in which he's been faced with injury. And you wouldn't know that based on the amount of games in which he's played. But through this season alone, he played through a torn labrum in his non-throwing shoulder. He played through a fractured humerus bone, and he played through a knee contusion that he suffered late in the season as well. Now, some would say, in a sense, maybe that's not the right thing to do, based on the fact that a lot of these injuries happened earlier on in the season, and with a torn labrum, the recovery period would have knocked him out for the entirety of the season. And being that they had a solid backup in Case Keenum, maybe if Baker Mayfield opted for the surgery earlier, maybe the Browns could have successfully made the playoffs and maybe had a more of a valuable season in play with a healthier quarterback in play, playing for them. But I'll tell you this. I think Baker Mayfield, what he proved to a lot of fans and a lot of haters, is that he's one of the gutsiest players in the entire NFL. Being somebody who's had labrum surgery, granted it was on my dominant arm, my right arm, it is one of the most painful things ever to deal with. Again, granted, that's been the only surgery that I've ever had in my life. It is one of the most painful things to go through. You have zero movement whatsoever, zero rotation, zero flexibility. On top of the fact, dealing with a leg injury and a knee contusion, and then a fractured humerus bone as well, in which I believe he suffered against the Arizona Cardinals in the beginning or the middle of the season. J.J. Watt sacked him and he landed on his humerus bone and fractured that. And he played through that. And to me, that's got to give some credit to Baker Mayfield, being that gutsy of a player, playing through all this adversity, being that there was already a lot of noise in whether the Cleveland Browns should pick up that fifth-year option or not, being that Baker Mayfield was being questioned as, can he be a starting winning quarterback in the NFL? On top of all these injuries to do that. And so I give Baker Mayfield, in my personal opinion, a lot of props for doing so and competing at the highest level in a very competitive division and a very competitive conference, for trying to stick it out, trying to give his team the best opportunity to win. Now the Seattle Seahawks, we'll jump into that, as in where can he potentially land? Now, the Seattle Seahawks, they've been very confident in Drew Lock and what he's been able to do and what they believe he's capable of doing since acquiring him in that Russell Wilson trade that they made about 2 weeks ago with the Denver Broncos. Drew Lock, he's been in the league about 2 years now, I believe. He came out of Missouri, one of the more talented quarterbacks in that class. In that class was Kyla Murray, obviously number 1 overall, Daniel Jones, Dwayne Haskins, and then a Drew Lock. And obviously not a very great quarterback class outside of really Kyla Murray. But Drew Lock, when healthy, he played decent. Again, he wasn't given the best weapons around, definitely not the best run game, definitely not the best offensive line protection, and not the defense that we see here today. But can he play and win you games with the Seattle Seahawks? I don't really know, to be honest with you, because the Seattle Seahawks have lost a lot. Their defense is completely decimated. Their offensive line, outside of Dwayne Brown, who's a 36-year-old left tackle and is also a free agent, is not good at all. They really have no running game. They have a Chris Carson who's always hurt. They just signed Rashad Penny back, I believe, on a 1 or 2 year deal. Their wide receivers are great in DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, but who's to say those two won't be traded or be around for the long haul to see potential success? And also Pete Carroll being a 69-year-old head coach, I think that he will coach this season, but who's to say he won't retire after this year? So I don't know if you could put all your eggs into the basket of Drew Lock, even though I think that he's very young and his talent is very raw and untapped, and maybe somebody can do it, but not with the likes of the Seattle Seahawks team in which they have to offer. And that's why I think that Seattle would be a decent place for Baker Mayfield. But Baker Mayfield, like we talked about with the Browns, and which I kind of agreed with the statement, is that if he didn't have success with that team, with one of the best pass blocking offensive lines in all of football, with Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb and OBJ and Jarvis Landry and Donovan's People-Jones and Rashad Higgins and Austin Hooper and David Njoku and Kevin Stefanski as the head coach, Seattle is nowhere near as talented as a team as that Browns roster was. And he didn't have success with that team. So is he really going to have success with the Seattle Seahawks, especially in a division that features the 49ers, which will, whether they're led by Trey Lance or whether they're led by a Jimmy Garoppolo, are they really going to be competitive with that team? No. Are they going to be competitive with a Kyler Murray, Cliff Kingsbury, Arizona Cardinals? Probably not. And especially not the LA Rams, who are just coming off a Super Bowl victory. So does it make sense to bring in a Baker Mayfield, or just, I don't like to use the word tank, but just run it out with this season, see where you land in the draft next year and start that rebuild and start that post-Russell Wilson rebuild? I think that's the likelihood, and that's why I don't think that he'll end up in Seattle either. And I think the likelihood of Baker Mayfield's path is going to be this, because just a recent report that just came out by Albert Breer is that the Browns were initially looking for a first-round pick. I don't think Baker Mayfield's getting that. Not with the numbers that he's put up career-wise. It's just not going to happen. Especially at an $18.8 million cap hit, it's just not going to happen. So the likelihood that I see, and a potential suitor and from what I've read today, and could make sense, is I think he gets released. I think that'll be number one. And number two, I think a suitor for him won't have to go too far from home. I think the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Pittsburgh Steelers can be a very viable option. In fact, there was a report today that the Browns would be, I don't remember exactly how it was said, but ultimately maybe even first online to acquire a Baker Mayfield if he was to be released. And why is that? Because the Steelers almost have a similar situation to the Cleveland Browns and what they were built. They have a really good run game. They have a decent core of tight ends and receivers. The difference is Cleveland didn't have a very good defense, although they tried their hardest to fix the secondary and the front four and the linebacking core and the safety core. The Steelers have a really, really, really good defense. And who knows if they'll repeat that. They lost a couple pieces. Obviously, they have a lot of money wrapped up into guys like Cam Hayward and obviously TJ Watt, Minka Fitzpatrick, but they're a very, very good defense. Could a Baker Mayfield potentially land in Pittsburgh? I think it is a viable option. They just signed a Mitch Trubisky to a short-term 2-year deal to really see, Mitch, what can you do? Mike Tomlin is your head coach. I don't think you're ever going to fail. I don't think that, at least in the time that Mike Tomlin's been a head coach with the Pittsburgh Steelers, he's never career-wise had a record below 500. So I have all the faith in the world for whatever quarterback that team has under center. This is a team that in 2019 was winning football games with Duck Hodges and Mason Rudolph. Who's to say that Baker Mayfield and Mitch Trubisky can't do the same thing? And it would definitely be an interesting training camp because I think it would be a very competitive training camp. Although I still think that Mitchell Trubisky would have the edge, obviously, as he was the quarterback signed in free agency. And Baker Mayfield will be a guy that they would acquire in a release fashion, not so trading for him. I think that could definitely be a viable option in which Baker Mayfield could potentially win a starting job. But that's really the only place, unfortunately, that I think that would make sense for Baker Mayfield at this time, because even though there's definitely a lack of quarterback play, especially in the NFC, AFC is loaded. In the NFC, with the jobs of the Atlanta Falcons being filled, with Marcus Mariota, the Colts filling that void, even though that's their 6th or 7th quarterback in the last 6 or 7 years, with Matt Ryan filling that void. There's not too many places for Baker Mayfield, a former number 1 overall pick just 4 years into his NFL career. Not too many places for Baker Mayfield to land, unfortunately, but I do think that Pittsburgh should be a name, should be a team to watch out for if he does get released. That'll do it here for today's edition of Review and Preview, or this video here on Review and Preview Sports. But before I let you go, make sure to give us a follow on our Facebook page, our Instagram page, our Twitter page, and make sure to listen to us on anchor.fm/review and preview. Obviously, you can listen to our podcast, but here on our video content, make sure to give us a subscribe and a like if you've liked what you've heard on our YouTube channel at Review and Preview Sports. Thank you all for listening, and stay tuned for more upcoming content, not just in NFL free agency, not just in the NFL, but Review and Preview Sports. We bring it all: MLB, NHL, NFL, NBA, and even wrestling. So stay tuned. Thank you all for listening, and have a great rest of your evening. And hopefully we'll see where Baker Mayfield ends up within the coming months or even the coming days. Who knows? Thank you all for listening.